Hi everyone, welcome to the Inclusive Education webinar on Policy 322. This is an information session for parents and welcome. My name is Sherry Jonah. I'm the Manager of Inclusive Education with the New Brunswick Association for Community Living. At NBACL, we work to support educators and educational assistants when it comes to inclusive education. We also have a tool called Creating an Inclusive School that helps schools create a more inclusive environment for students, staff, and the community. We sometimes hold family retreats for parents of children who have an intellectual disability so that parents can learn about their child's rights, about inclusive education, friendships, and much more. If you are listening to this webinar, it probably means that you have a son or daughter in the school system who has an intellectual disability. Hopefully this webinar can clarify a few things for you on Policy 322 on inclusive education. During this webinar, you will need to have in front of you Policy 322 and Policy 703. So please get those out and I'll let you know when it's time to take a look at those. New Brunswick has been working on a more inclusive education system for many years. A lot of the work that got us to where we are today started a long time ago. We could probably have a whole webinar that just focuses on the story of inclusive education in New Brunswick, but for today, we're just going to go through these 10 dates. We'll start with 1948. This is when the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted at the end of the Second World War. It acknowledged the importance of the government protecting and ensuring basic human rights and combating discrimination. It also guarantees the rights of every individual everywhere in the world. During the 50s and the 60s, individuals and community-based services were often created and adopted for parents of children with intellectual disabilities. These parents began arguing for their rights to keep their children at home and not institutionalize them, as many doctors and professionals recommended. The New Brunswick Association for Community Living was formed in 1957. They created auxiliary classes for their children who had an intellectual disability. These classes provided education and training to children who were judged to be unable to benefit from regular education because of their disability. Most local associations were created to be sponsoring societies under the Auxiliary Class Act. At the time, the government provided funding in terms of the teachers' salaries. However, parents were responsible for covering the financial cost of the building, transportation, supplies, cleaning, etc., in order to maintain these classes. The national commitment of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom to the protection of the rights came about in 1982. This was to ensure equality of rights without discrimination. It was to protect the rights of people so that everyone had equal benefits. In 1986, Bill 85 on inclusive education, which was groundbreaking legislation in New Brunswick, was developed. This is when the Department of Education became entirely responsible for the education of children who had previously been segregated to auxiliary classes. So this bill supported the integrated learning environment within the community school as a primary educational option for students. Many local associations ceased to be active because their mandates ceased to exist, as well as they operated Okay, restart. In 1986, Bill 85 on inclusive education In 1986, Bill 85 on inclusive education, which was groundbreaking legislation in New Brunswick, was developed. This is when the Department of Education became entirely responsible for the education of children who had previously been segregated to auxiliary classes. So this bill supported the integrated learning environment within the community school as a primary educational option for students. Many local associations ceased to be active because their mandates ceased to exist, as well as they operated those classes. Then it went to 1990, when the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child came about. The two articles that helped move things along were Article 28 and 29. Article 28 made education accessible to all children. Article 29 referenced that the education of the child would be directed to the development of the child's personality, talents, and mental and physical abilities to their fullest potential. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities came in 2006. This really helped because it stated that persons with disabilities were not to be excluded from the general education system on the basis of their disability. In the same year, the Wayne McCain report came out. In case you're interested in taking a look, the title is, and it's pretty long, Connecting Care and Challenge, Tapping Our Human Potential, Inclusive Education, a Review of Programming and Services in New Brunswick. This report really focused on inclusion. In 2007, the New Brunswick Human Rights Commission came out with the Guidelines on Accommodating Students with a Disability, called the Duty to Accommodate. You can also easily find this document online. You'll find really good information in this document about providing reasonable accommodations. And just lately in 2012, the Porter O'Quinn report came out. If you're interested in this one, you can also find it online if you search for Strengthening Inclusion, Strengthening Schools. It contains many recommendations on how to strengthen inclusion and teacher practices in our schools. Finally, in 2013, Policy 322 on Inclusive Education came out. The rest of this webinar will go through this policy to help you better understand how it applies to your child. There are different terms that are good to understand that are commonly used in New Brunswick. Unlike other provinces in the country, the public school system in New Brunswick doesn't have segregated schools. Often there is confusion around integration and inclusion. If we look now at the four diagrams on this slide, you'll notice that there are different colored balls. There are purple, red, blue, and green balls. In these diagrams, the purple, blue, and red balls symbolize the students who have a disability. The green balls would symbolize those who do not. At the bottom left diagram, children who have a disability are integrated in the school and classroom. If they are integrated, it means that they are physically in the classroom, but are still apart from the other students. They are not doing the same thing as the other students, but they are doing their own things and not fully participating with their peers. If you look at the inclusion diagram, which is on the bottom right, we will see that all the balls are mixed together. Inclusion is having all children learning together in the same environment. Usually if you are walking by a classroom that is inclusive, you can't tell the kids who have a disability apart from the ones that don't. They are grouped in pairs, small groups, large groups, participating in all aspects of the class. They are receiving different supports, so you wouldn't be able to tell just by walking by. They are getting the supports they need based on their needs. So this is what the classroom should look like today. Inclusion is based on a common learning environment in the neighborhood school. They are attending the school their siblings who don't have a disability would be attending. The common learning environment would be the classroom with their peers of the same age. This would also be the gymnasium, music class, cafeteria, outside, if the teacher is doing her lesson there. Research shows that students do benefit from an inclusive environment because they are more engaged, there are more social opportunities for them, and they are learning with and from all of their peers. Inclusion is based on safe and accessible learning environments. This is very important to inclusion. If an environment is safe and caring, which in turn makes it a positive learning environment, then everyone benefits. Anybody, adults, children, teenagers, learn best when they feel safe. That's not just physically, but also emotionally. An inclusive environment is accessible both physically and academically. This means that all students are able to come into the school and all of the rooms they need to get to, classrooms, office, cafeteria, schoolyard, and more. The learning is also accessible to all students. Teaching strategies are used in order to make sure that all learners are getting something from the lesson. Accommodations are done so that students are getting the support they need to reach their full potential. Inclusion is also based on respect for diversity. A classroom should really reflect the community. It should reflect our differences. That's not just based on our ability. It's really based on all kinds of different things like race, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, real or perceived, social condition, and all kinds of other things. It's based on a personalized learning environment for all. Every student is getting the support that he or she needs. The supports are personalized to their needs. Teaching strategies are differentiated and based on their ability and their needs. And lastly, for this slide, inclusion is based on collaborative, flexible, and responsive planning. All students are learning from the lesson that has been prepared in teams. The teacher usually works with a resource teacher. There are teams involved. The learning is very flexible and it's responsive to the student's strengths and needs. It's a great environment to learn in. There's lots of collaboration going on within the school and the teams. Inclusion also means that public education is universal. The provincial curriculum is provided equitably to all students, and this is done in an inclusive, common learning environment shared among age-appropriate neighborhood peers. Public education is individualized. The success of each student depends on the degree to which education is based on the student's best interest and responds to his or her strengths and needs. And public education is flexible and responsive to change. So the policy has all kinds of different sections. We're going to go through some of them in more detail, but we're not going to cover all of them. If you have any questions about something that wasn't covered, you can always contact me. There are many definitions in the policy, but there are a few of them that are a little bit more important to note. So for now, we'll focus on those. Accommodations are there to remove barriers for students. They ensure accessibility for all students. They're able to access the curriculum. They're able to access the learning. Teachers are doing adjustments to instructional strategies. They also allow some extra time to complete a task, provide a quiet space for a test, are given specific assistive technology, and can provide the photocopy notes if needed. So those are all accommodations that some students would require in order to reach their fullest potential. If you want to learn more about this, the department has a document you can get online called the Accommodations for Instruction and Assessment. You can get both a paper copy of this document or get an electronic version. The common learning environment is really a word that defines a classroom where everyone is receiving instruction. So the common learning environment, you would have kids of the same age with varying abilities. This could also be the gym or the cafeteria like I mentioned before. The common learning environment meets the needs of all learners. The personalized learning environment is in or outside the common learning environment. This could mean interventions that are done within or out of the common learning environment. This is for students who require specific and individual interventions and strategies. These goals are targeted and sustained. When this happens, there is a clear plan and there has to be evidence to support the reasons behind it. Variation of the common learning environment is when the student is spending more than 25% of his time or more than one period a day outside the common learning environment. The interventions used in this case are also targeted. The student could be in a full-time placement or pulled out for his or her individual needs. That would be for students who need more help or need to go work on things such as ABA, which is the acronym for Applied Behavior Analysis. That's when the EA or teacher would be using techniques with a student to bring about positive change in his or her behavior. A school-based education support services team is a team led by the school principal that assists classroom teachers to develop and implement instructional and/or management strategies and to coordinate support resources for students with diverse needs. In addition to school administrators, the team is made up of education support teachers and other staff members whose primary role is to strengthen the school's capacity to ensure student learning. The membership of the school-based ESS team will be determined by size, level, and local context of the school. Referrals can be made by the parents and guardians, and in certain cases, the student himself. Parents are part of the team and student self-advocates as well. It's important that children learn early to advocate for themselves and help with decisions that can affect them so that it prepares them for life after school. So there are many more definitions here, but we won't go through all of them. Feel free to go through them after. I think those were the 5 key ones that we had to discuss in a little more detail. For this section, we will be going through the policy itself, so if you have it in front of you, you might want to follow along. I'll also bring out policy 703 later on if you want to get that one ready as well. We're going to focus on section 6 of the policy, which are the requirements and standards. This is the most important part of the policy. It gives you all that good information that's important to know as a parent. We're going to start with 6.1, which is a common learning environment. I talked to you just a few minutes ago about what that is, but it's important to know that it enables each student to participate fully. You don't have a student who is just sitting in the back. He or she is fully participating in the environment. He or she does the same as the other students. They are part of group work. They go up to the board, answer questions, etc. They're really participating fully in the common learning environment. It is where different student-centered learning principles are applied to engage students and allow them to respond in different ways and present in different ways. There are all kinds of interventions so that they can reach all students. There are also accommodations, and they're implemented in a timely manner. 6.2 is about supports for inclusion. The policy states that the principal allocates available resources to maximize assistance to classroom teachers. That means providing them with professional learning opportunities and supports from the ESS team members so that they're able to grow with inclusion and that they feel comfortable with it. There are also academic and behavior interventions for the students, and these are based on a data analysis and evidence-based practice. And we know that behavior can often be a barrier to inclusion with students that we support, so it's important that teachers follow data and evidence when it comes to that. It's important to note that the student is primarily taught by the classroom or subject teacher. He can be helped and supported by an educational assistant, but primarily the teaching is done by the teacher. We'll skip down to number 9 now. It's also noted that schools have to ensure that all students have access to co-curricular and school-sponsored activities. That means all of those activities that are sometimes during or after school times. They would also be provided with transportation in a school vehicle. That doesn't mean that your child will be getting transportation when others aren't, but if it's provided for other students, it would be provided for your child as well. We just talked about what should occur. Now let's look at some things that shouldn't occur in section 6.2.2. The first is segregated self-contained programs or classes based on disability. That shouldn't be happening in schools based on this policy. And those alternative education programs that exist out there for students would not happen between kindergarten and grade 8. They would only be there for students between grades 9 and 12. Now we're going to talk about the Personalized Learning Plan, PLP, in section 6.3, which was formerly known as the SEP. Students would receive a PLP when one or more of the following conditions exist. Strategies beyond robust instruction are required. So they have tried different supports. They've provided the student with accommodations, but it's not really working. So a PLP would be developed for that student. The second would be when behavior supports are required. That's when a student would need different supports to help with behavior. Then there would be a PLP for that student. And when the common learning environment is to be varied. We talked about that earlier. It means when 25% of the student's time is spent outside the classroom or more than one period daily. So if that time is spent out of the classroom, a PLP would be developed for that student. So a PLP provides for the full instructional hours of the student based on his or her grade level, so the time that the student is at school. In high school, the PLP would include transition strategies because it's a very important time during a student's life, and it can often be quite difficult for students who have an intellectual disability to transition. So the school wants to make sure that there's a plan in place and it's supported in the PLP. So there are a few things that teachers should be doing. And again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll go through it quickly. The PLP is usually based on the curriculum. The student would be doing some of the same work as the other students. It's based on the curriculum, but it's based on his or her needs and balanced on their level as well. They would be expected the student to do something that they wouldn't be expecting the student to do something that he or she wouldn't be able to do, but the student is still doing something that's based on the curriculum and that is challenging. However, sometimes the PLP is based on prerequisite skills needed or individualized skills outside the prescribed provincial curriculum. The PLP should be developed, implemented, and updated when required. It's not the same PLP all the time. There is a definite upgrading or updating being done so that it moves on with the student. Formal progress reports for the student with a PLP are also being done. So as a parent, you are actually seeing the report card with information on what your child has been working on, what he's accomplished, and what he's struggling with. You see what goals they've achieved, and you would be getting the progress reports like other parents. We'll now talk about the variation of the common learning environment in section 6.4. It's important to note here that before they vary the common learning environment, they have to demonstrate that the school's capacity to meet the needs of the student is not sufficient to achieve the learning outcomes. This would happen when the student, after all the supports are put into place, is not able to meet his goals in the common learning environment. When that decision is made, the school has conditions they need to follow. You will find those in section 6.4.3. A PLP is definitely needed to be created at this point. The parents are fully informed. You've been told by the school that this is what is going to happen. There's ongoing documentation and monitoring to look at what the student is achieving, and there needs to be outcomes in place that are detailed and targeted. Clear measures are established to ensure inclusion in the social life of the school is present. So co-curricular activities as well, because it's important that the student is being socializing and having lunch and breaks with his or her peers. The school may have a Best Buddies program or a circle of friends in which the students can participate to ensure his or her social life is not forgotten. Also, there are statements included within the student's learning plan of the expected duration of the time outside the common learning environment and the plan for the student's return to the common learning environment so that it is time limited and for a specific reason. And again, there would be progress reports showing what's going on with that student. However, if a student is out of school for an extended period of time, that would be more than 2 weeks. If home tutoring is the only education that is received at that time, the student would be offered a minimum of 8 hours up to a maximum of 12 hours of tutoring per week. So students who would be getting an education by a tutor at home would be getting 8 to 12 hours a week to make sure that they are receiving proper education. Just a heads up, this is the section where we'll ask you to bring out policy 703. Okay, let's talk about behavior crisis response, which is section 6.5. A behavior crisis is a situation where a student's actions pose a danger to himself or others, so mostly physical harm. That could be dangerous for all involved, so the school wants to make sure that if this happens, the timeout procedures are in compliance with policy 703. So you should have policy 703 in front of you. What that says here in this policy at 5.3 is that students are responsible for their behaviors, but that's in accordance to their age and stage of development and to the extent to which their behavior is voluntary. So when this behavior is attributed to their disability, if the student is not able to control their behavior because of their disability, there will be different interventions put in place. These interventions would be appropriate and employed with the student's needs in mind. So that means that it won't be the same as another student who really knows and fully understands what he or she just did. The policy talks about students who have a disability again in section 6.6.3. Some students may behave in challenging ways that are beyond the student's control or understanding. So again, that could be a student that we support. They might behave in a way, in certain ways, and not have any control over it. These behaviors could simply represent the student's attempt to communicate with others. Where this appears to be the case, such student may not be subject to the typical consequences established by the school. The student's PLP will provide direction and will be modified if the behavior continues to be problematic. Certain behaviors may indicate that additional consideration of the behavior supports provided to the student is required. So again, if there are things that would be different with students whose behavior is out of their control. All right, let's go back to policy 322 at section 6.5.2. This policy ensures that any removal of the common learning environment is temporary. If a student needs to be removed because of behavior, it's temporary. They wouldn't be out 100% of the time forever. It also ensures that any removal of the common learning environment is never used as a punishment. The school wouldn't take a student out just to punish him. It would be because he is about to harm himself or others. The school wants to make sure everyone is safe. I will take the next few moments to skim through the rest of the policy and just focus on the things that are most important for you to know as parents. If you look at section 6.6, suspension is talked about. If a student is suspended, then again, a principal must follow procedures for student suspension as permitted by the Education Act and Policy 703, which we just talked about. Students whose behaviors were out of their control would not be treated the same way as other students. They would have different supports put in place to ensure they're receiving the proper supports they need for their behavior. Graduation is a topic in section 6.8. They talk about how students will get their diplomas in alphabetical order rather than based on performance. Students who are on a PLP will also receive a diploma. Section 6.9 talks about the district-based education support services team, which I briefly talked about when we were in the definitions section. If you want to know more, it explains it here, what they do, and how they provide support to classroom teachers. If you have any questions regarding the policy that were not answered, please feel free to call or email us. If you have any questions regarding your child's education or have any issues, contact your child's school and his or her classroom teacher should be able to help you with any questions that you may have. All of our information is available on our website, and you can find that at nbcl.nb.ca. I hope this clarifies a few things for you, and thank you for tuning in. I look forward to hearing from you. Have a great day.